A millionaire drops a bunch of $100 bills in front of a homeless man and secretly follows him to see what he does with them. But what he witnesses shocked everyone. Eddie Pearson stood at the window of his penthouse office, gazing down at the bustling city below. At 42, he had achieved more than most people could dream of in a lifetime. His tech company had revolutionized urban transportation, making him a millionaire many times over. Yet as he watched the tiny figures scurrying along the sidewalks, a familiar restlessness gnawed at him. He turned away from the window, his reflection in the polished mahogany desk catching his eye. Salt and pepper hair, tailored suit, and a face that graced magazine covers, the very picture of success. But the eyes that stared back at him held a question he couldn't shake. Was all of this enough? Eddie's mind wandered to a conversation he'd had with his late father years ago. "Money's just a tool, son," his father had said. "It's what you do with it that matters." Those words had always stayed with him, a constant reminder that there was more to life than accumulating wealth. As he pondered this, his gaze fell on a news article open on his tablet. "Homelessness on the rise, city struggles to cope." The headline stirred something in him, a mix of guilt, curiosity, and an inexplicable urge to do something. Without fully realizing what he was doing, Eddie found himself reaching for his wallet. He pulled out a stack of crisp $100 bills, pocket change for him, but a fortune to many. A wild idea began to form in his mind. What if he could see firsthand what someone would do with unexpected wealth? Would they squander it, or use it wisely? His heart raced with the excitement he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about giving away money. It was about understanding human nature, about seeing if kindness could spark more kindness. "Lisa," he called to his assistant through the intercom, "cancel my meetings for the rest of the day. I'm heading out." As the elevator descended, Eddie's mind whirled with possibilities. He was about to step out of his comfortable world and into the unknown. Little did he know, this impulsive decision was about to change not just his life, but the lives of many others in ways he couldn't yet imagine. The midday sun beat down on the city streets as Eddie stepped out of his office building. He had swapped his designer suit for a more inconspicuous outfit, jeans, a plain t-shirt, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. In his pocket, the stack of $100 bills felt like a ticking time bomb of potential. Eddie walked aimlessly, his eyes scanning the sidewalks and alleyways. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for until he saw him, a man sitting on a piece of cardboard, his belongings packed into a worn backpack beside him. The man, who appeared to be in his late 50s, had a weathered face that spoke of hard times, but there was a dignity in the way he held himself. A small cardboard sign propped against his knee read, "Anything helps. God bless." Eddie's heart raced. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. He approached casually, pretending to fumble with his phone. As he passed the man, he deliberately let the stack of bills fall from his pocket, scattering them on the ground near the homeless man. "Oh," Eddie exclaimed, feigning surprise. He quickly scooped up a few of the bills, leaving several clearly visible on the ground. Then, pretending to receive an urgent call, he hurried away, ducking into a nearby alley where he could observe. Unnoticed, the homeless man's reaction was immediate. "Sir, sir," he called out, his voice gravelly but strong. "You dropped something." Eddie watched, breath held, as the man struggled to his feet. He was tall, despite a slight stoop, with salt and pepper, hair that hadn't seen a proper cut in months. The man looked around, clearly conflicted, before bending down to gather the money. To Eddie's surprise, the man didn't immediately pocket the cash. Instead, he held it carefully, looking up and down the street as if hoping its owner would return. When no one came, he sighed heavily, his shoulders sagging with the weight of a decision Eddie couldn't quite understand. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the man tucked the money into his jacket pocket and began to walk. Eddie, his heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation, followed at a discreet distance. As they walked, Eddie couldn't help but notice the way the man carried himself. Despite his ragged appearance, there was a purposefulness to his stride, a determination that intrigued Eddie. This wasn't a man defeated by his circumstances. This was someone with a story. They passed several liquor stores and pawn shops, but the man didn't even glance their way. Instead, he headed towards a small convenience store on the corner. Eddie quickened his pace, positioning himself near the store's window where he could observe without being seen. The homeless man entered the store, and Eddie held his breath. This was the moment of truth. Would his experiment reveal the darker side of human nature, or would it surprise him? As he watched, Eddie couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of something life-changing. Little did he know, the true surprises were yet to come. Inside the convenience store, the homeless man, Quincy, felt the weight of the money in his pocket like a stone. His calloused hands trembled slightly as he reached for a shopping basket, his mind racing with possibilities. For years, Quincy had dreamed of this moment, having enough money to buy more than just his next meal. He could almost taste the whiskey that had once been his constant companion, could almost feel the warmth it would spread through his tired bones. But as he stood there, surrounded by aisles of food and necessities, a different kind of warmth filled him. He thought of Sarah, the young mother who slept in the alley 2 blocks from his usual spot, her 2 small children huddled close. He thought of old Joe, whose hacking cough had been getting worse with each passing day. He thought of Maria, whose arthritic hands made it difficult for her to open the cans of food the shelter sometimes provided. With each face that flashed through his mind, Quincy's resolve strengthened. He had been given an opportunity, and he knew exactly what he needed to do with it. Moving purposefully through the store, Quincy filled his basket with items he hadn't been able to afford in years. Soap, deodorant, toothbrushes and toothpaste, warm socks and gloves, granola bars, bottled water and canned goods with easy open tops. At the pharmacy counter, he asked for over-the-counter pain relievers and cough medicine. As the cashier rang up his purchases, Quincy felt a mix of emotions he couldn't quite name. There was joy, certainly, at being able to help others, but there was also a tinge of sadness, a reminder of all he had lost and how far he had fallen. "That'll be $342.67, the cashier said, eyeing Quincy warily. Without hesitation, Quincy pulled out the stack of bills. He counted out the exact amount, handling the money with a reverence that spoke of its rarity in his life. As he handed it over, he caught sight of his reflection in the store's security mirror, a man he barely recognized doing something he had always wanted to do. Outside the store, Eddie watched in astonishment as Quincy emerged with several full bags. This was not at all what he had expected. His mind raced, trying to understand what he was witnessing. As Quincy set off down the street with his purchases, Eddie followed, his curiosity growing with each step. They wound their way through the city, Quincy moving with purpose, Eddie trailing behind, increasingly fascinated. They passed through areas Eddie had never seen up close, alleys and underpasses where the city's homeless sought shelter. At each stop, Quincy distributed his purchases. A toothbrush and toothpaste to a young man whose smile revealed neglected teeth, socks and gloves to an elderly woman huddled under a thin blanket, pain relievers to a man nursing an injured arm. With each interaction, Eddie saw a side of the city and of humanity that he had never truly noticed before. Quincy moved among these people with a familiarity and compassion that spoke of shared experiences. There were no grand gestures, no spectacle to his giving, just simple acts of kindness, passed from one person to another with quiet dignity. As the bags gradually emptied, Eddie felt a lump forming in his throat. He had set out to test human nature, half expecting to confirm his cynical views. Instead, he was witnessing a profound lesson in compassion and community. The sun was setting as Quincy distributed the last of his purchases. Eddie watched as he sat down heavily on a bench, emotionally and physically spent. In that moment, Eddie knew he couldn't remain a silent observer any longer. It was time to reveal himself and confront the unexpected outcome of his experiment. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out of the shadows and approached Quincy, his mind whirling with questions and a growing sense that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet imagine. Eddie's heart pounded as he approached Quincy, who sat on the bench with his eyes closed, seemingly lost in thought. The setting sun cast long shadows across the park, lending an air of surreality to the moment. "Excuse me," Eddie said softly, causing Quincy to start and look up. "I think I might have dropped some money earlier today. You wouldn't happen to have seen it, would you?" Quincy's eyes widened with recognition, and a mix of emotions played across his weathered face. Surprise, guilt, and a flicker of something that looked like relief. He stood up quickly, wincing slightly as his stiff joints protested. "Yes, sir," Quincy said, his voice rough but clear. "I found it and I used it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the remaining bills, holding them out to Eddie, with a trembling hand. "I'm so sorry. I should have tried harder to find you. I saw an opportunity to help some folks who really needed it, but that's no excuse for taking what wasn't mine." Eddie looked at the outstretched hand, then at Quincy's face. The genuine remorse and integrity he saw there moved him deeply. He gently pushed Quincy's hand back. "Keep it," Eddie said softly. "In fact," he pulled out his wallet and added several more $100 bills to the stack in Quincy's hand. "Take these too." Quincy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Sir, I can't. This is too much. I don't understand." Eddie took a deep breath. "I'm the one who should apologize, Quincy. You see, I dropped that money on purpose. It was an experiment, and I've been following you all day." He watched as understanding dawned on Quincy's face, followed quickly by a flash of anger. "An experiment? What kind of game are you playing, mister?" Eddie held up his hands placatingly. "It's not a game, I assure you. My name is Eddie Pearson, and I'm what most people would call a successful businessman. But lately I've been feeling like something's missing. I wanted to see what someone would do if they suddenly came into some money. I expected, I'm not sure what I expected, but it certainly wasn't what I saw today." Quincy's anger faded, replaced by a wary curiosity. "And what exactly did you see?" "I saw kindness," Eddie said simply. "I saw compassion. I saw a man who had every reason to think only of himself, but instead thought of others. You've taught me more in one day than I've learned in years of business meetings and charity galas." Quincy sat back down on the bench, shaking his head in disbelief. "You don't understand, Mr. Pearson. What I did today, it's nothing special. When you live on the streets, sometimes kindness is all you have to give, and sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you going." Eddie sat down beside him, feeling the rough wood of the bench through his jeans, a sensation so foreign to his usual environment. "Tell me, Quincy, if you don't mind, I'd like to hear your story." As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Quincy began to speak. He told Eddie of a life that had once been full of promise, a loving family, a good job as a high school teacher, a future that seemed secure. Then came the accident that took his wife and daughter, the spiral into grief and alcoholism, the loss of his job and home. "It can happen so fast," Quincy said, his voice barely above a whisper. "One day you're planning for retirement, and the next you're wondering where your next meal is coming from. But you know what, Mr. Pearson? Even at my lowest, I never forgot what it meant to be human, to care for others, because sometimes that's all we have left." Eddie listened, transfixed. In Quincy's story, he heard echoes of his own fears, his own questions about the meaning of success and the nature of compassion. As Quincy finished speaking, a silence fell between them, filled with the weight of shared understanding. Finally, Eddie spoke. "Quincy, I came out here today looking for answers. I think I've found them, but not in the way I expected. You've shown me what real wealth looks like, and now I'd like to return the favor." Quincy looked at him quizzically. "What do you mean?" Eddie leaned forward, his eyes bright with purpose. "I mean, I'd like to offer you a chance, a job, an apartment, a fresh start. No strings attached, just an opportunity to rebuild your life." Quincy's breath caught in his throat. "Mr. Pearson, I don't know what to say. It's too much." "It's not nearly enough," Eddie countered, "but it's a start. What do you say, Quincy? Are you willing to take a chance on an impulsive millionaire who's just beginning to learn what really matters in life?" As Quincy struggled to find words, Eddie felt a sense of anticipation unlike anything he'd experienced in years. He knew with a certainty that surprised him that whatever Quincy's answer, both their lives had already changed irrevocably. In the growing darkness of the park, two men from vastly different worlds sat side by side, poised on the brink of A journey neither could have anticipated when the day began. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity and adjustment for both Quincy and Eddie. True to his word, Eddie set Quincy up with a modest but comfortable apartment in a quiet neighborhood. The space was small but clean, with large windows that let in plenty of natural light, a far cry from the shadowy underpasses and dim shelters Quincy had grown accustomed to. Quincy's first night in the apartment was a sleepless one. The softness of the bed felt foreign after years of sleeping on hard surfaces. The silence, broken only by the gentle hum of the refrigerator, was almost deafening compared to the constant background noise of the streets. He found himself getting up frequently, pacing the small space, running his hands over the smooth countertops and clean walls, as if to convince himself it was all real. Eddie, for his part, threw himself into helping Quincy with an enthusiasm that surprised even himself. He arranged for new clothes, a basic phone, and all the necessities Quincy would need to start his new life. But more than that, he found himself deeply invested in Quincy's success, spending hours talking with him, learning about his past, and helping him navigate the complexities of rejoining mainstream society. The job Eddie offered was in the mailroom of his company. It was entry-level work, but it came with a steady paycheck and benefits, things Quincy hadn't had in years. On his first day, Quincy arrived an hour early, his new shirt crisp and his face cleanly shaven. As he sorted envelopes and packages, he couldn't help but feel a mix of gratitude and trepidation. The fluorescent lights and hum of office machinery were a world away from the life he'd known on the streets. As the days passed, Quincy's colleagues in the mailroom began to warm to him. His quiet diligence and unfailing politeness made him easy to work with, and soon he found himself included in lunch invitations and casual conversations by the water cooler. It was a slow process of reintegration, each small interaction helping to rebuild the social muscles that had atrophied during his years on the street. But the transition wasn't without its challenges. Quincy often found himself overwhelmed by the fast pace of office life, the constant hum of activity, a stark contrast to the unpredictable rhythms of street life. There were moments when the pressure would build, and he'd find himself longing for the simplicity of his old life, as harsh as it had been. In these moments, Quincy would retreat to the small park near his new apartment. Sitting on a bench much like the one where Eddie had revealed his true identity, Quincy would close his eyes and take deep breaths, grounding himself in the present moment. It was during one of these moments of quiet reflection that Eddie found him, about a month into his new job. "Mind if I join you?" Eddie asked, gesturing to the empty space on the bench. Quincy opened his eyes, startled out of his reverie. "Mr. Pearson, I mean Eddie, of course, please sit." Eddie settled onto the bench, his usual polished appearance slightly rumpled after a long day at the office. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, watching as the evening light painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. "How are you doing, Quincy?" Eddie finally asked, his voice gentle. "Really doing, I mean." Quincy sighed, running a hand through his now neatly trimmed hair. It's a lot, Eddie. Don't get me wrong, I'm more grateful than I can say for everything you've done, but sometimes it feels like I'm living someone else's life. Like any moment, I'm going to wake up back on that piece of cardboard, and all of this will have been a dream." Eddie nodded, understanding in his eyes. Change is never easy, even when it's for the better. You're navigating a whole new world, Quincy. It's okay to feel overwhelmed. Quincy hesitated, then forged ahead. "I worry that I'm going to let you down, that I'm not going to be able to live up to this chance you've given me." Eddie turned to face Quincy fully, his expression serious. "Quincy, listen to me. You could never let me down. The fact that you're here, that you're trying, that's more than enough. Remember, this isn't about me, it's about you, and the life you want to build for yourself." Quincy felt a lump form in his throat at Eddie's words. "I do want to make the most of this chance," he said softly. "Not just for myself, but I keep thinking about the others, the people I left behind on the streets. I wish I could do more for them." A thoughtful look crossed Eddie's face. "Maybe you can," he said slowly. "You have a unique perspective, Quincy. You understand their struggles in a way that most people never could. That knowledge, that empathy, it's valuable, more valuable than you might realize. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Eddie and Quincy continued to talk. They discussed Quincy's progress at work, his hopes for the future, and the challenges he was facing. But more than that, they talked about the people Quincy had known on the streets, their stories, their struggles, and their incredible resilience in the face of adversity. By the time they parted ways, a seed of an idea had been planted in both their minds. Neither of them could have predicted where it would lead, but they both felt a sense of excitement and purpose that hadn't been there before. As Quincy walked back to his apartment that night, he felt a shift in his perspective. The challenges he faced suddenly seemed less like insurmountable obstacles and more like steps on a journey that, he was beginning to realize, might have a greater purpose than he had ever imagined. As weeks turned into months, Quincy settled into his new life with growing confidence. His work in the mailroom remained steady, but it was his after-hours activities that truly began to shape his new path. Inspired by his conversation with Eddie in the park, Quincy had started volunteering at a local homeless shelter on weekends. At first, his role was simple: serving meals, sorting donations, and offering a friendly ear to those who needed it. But as time went on, Quincy found himself becoming more involved. His unique perspective as someone who had lived on both sides of homelessness made him an invaluable resource. One chilly Saturday morning, as Quincy was helping to distribute warm clothing at the shelter, he met someone who would become an unexpected ally in his journey. Her name was Dr. Amelia Chen, a social worker who had dedicated her career to addressing the root causes of homelessness. "You have a real gift, you know," Dr. Chen said to Quincy as they worked side by side, folding donated blankets. "The way you connect with people here, it's special." Quincy felt a flush of pride at her words. "I just understand where they're coming from, that's all. I've been where they are." Dr. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Exactly. And that understanding is incredibly valuable. Have you ever considered turning this into more than just volunteer work?" The question caught Quincy off guard. "What do you mean?" "Well," Dr. Chen said, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm, "there's a growing recognition in our field of the importance of peer support. People who have lived experience of homelessness, working alongside traditional social workers and counselors. Your insights could be invaluable in helping to shape more effective programs and policies." The idea intrigued Quincy, but it also terrified him. "I don't know, Dr. Chen. I'm not exactly qualified. I don't have any degrees or training. But you have something just as valuable: real-world experience," Dr. Chen countered. "And as for training, well, that's something that can be addressed. In fact, I teach some courses at the community college that might be perfect for you." As they continued their work, Dr. Chen told Quincy about a certificate program in social services that was designed for people looking to enter the field, especially those with lived experience of the issues they'd be addressing. The program was part-time, designed to accommodate working adults, and there were scholarships available for those who needed them. That evening, Quincy couldn't stop thinking about Dr. Chen's suggestion. The idea of turning his experiences into something that could help others was appealing, but it also felt like a huge leap. He decided to talk it over with Eddie. To Quincy's surprise, Eddie was immediately supportive of the idea. "Quincy, this could be perfect for you," he said, his eyes shining with excitement. "You've always talked about wanting to do more to help others. This could be your chance." "But what about my job here?" Quincy asked, gesturing around Eddie's office where they were having their conversation. "I can't just leave after everything you've done for me." Eddie leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Who says you have to leave? Look, Quincy, when I offered you this job, it wasn't just about giving you a paycheck. It was about giving you a foundation to build a new life. If this is the direction you want that life to take, then I'm behind you 100%. With Eddie's encouragement and Dr. Chen's guidance, Quincy took the plunge. He enrolled in the certificate program, attending evening classes after work and on weekends. The coursework was challenging, especially for someone who had been out of school for so long, but Quincy attacked it with determination. As he progressed through the program, Quincy found his worldview expanding. He learned about the complex Factors that contributed to homelessness: mental health issues, systemic poverty, lack of affordable housing. But more than that, he learned about the innovative approaches being developed to address these issues. One day, about halfway through the program, Quincy was sitting in a class on community outreach strategies when an idea struck him. He thought back to his time on the streets, to the small acts of kindness that had meant so much. He thought about Eddie's experiment with the $100 bills and how it had changed both their lives. What if, Quincy wondered, there was a way to replicate that kind of transformative experience on a larger scale? What if they could create a program that combined immediate assistance with long-term support and opportunities? As the idea took shape in his mind, Quincy felt a surge of excitement. He couldn't wait to share his thoughts with Eddie and Dr. Chen. Little did he know, this moment of inspiration was about to set in motion a chain of events that would impact far more lives than he could have imagined. It was a crisp autumn morning when Quincy nervously adjusted his tie, standing outside the boardroom of Eddie's company. In his hands, he clutched a well-worn notebook filled with ideas, calculations, and dreams. Today was the day he would present his concept to Eddie and the board of directors, a bold new initiative that could change the way they approached corporate social responsibility. As he waited to be called in, Quincy's mind raced back over the past few months. After his moment of inspiration in class, he had thrown himself into developing his idea. Nights and weekends were spent researching, consulting with Dr. Chen, and refining his proposal. Eddie had been supportive throughout, offering guidance and connections, but insisting that this be Quincy's project to shape and present. "Quincy, they're ready for you," Eddie's assistant said, holding the door open. Taking a deep breath, Quincy stepped into the boardroom. The faces that turned to look at him were curious, some skeptical, others encouraging. At the head of the table sat Eddie, who gave him a reassuring nod. "Good morning, everyone," Quincy began, his voice steadier than he felt. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak with you today. I'm here to propose a new initiative that I believe could make a significant impact on our community, while also enhancing our company's social responsibility efforts." As Quincy launched into his presentation, he felt his nervousness fade away, replaced by passion for the project he had poured his heart into. He outlined a program that would combine immediate financial assistance with long-term support and opportunities for homeless individuals. "The key," Quincy explained, "is that it's not just about giving money, it's about giving hope and a real chance at a new life. We would provide not just financial support, but also job training, mentorship, and ongoing assistance to help people transition out of homelessness permanently." He went on to detail how the program would work, from the initial outreach on the streets to the long-term follow-up support. He shared stories from his own experiences, both as someone who had been homeless and as someone who had successfully transitioned back into the workforce. As he spoke, Quincy could see the expressions around the table changing. Skepticism gave way to interest, and in some cases, to genuine enthusiasm. When he finished his presentation, there was a moment of silence before the questions began. The board members pressed him on the details, the costs, the logistics, the potential risks and rewards. Quincy answered each query thoughtfully, drawing on his newfound knowledge from his certificate program and his lived experience. Finally, Eddie spoke up. "Quincy, it's extraordinary. You've clearly put a tremendous amount of thought and heart into this proposal. But I have one question. Why our company? Why not propose this to a non-profit or a government agency?" Quincy nodded, having anticipated this question. "Mr. Pearson, Eddie, when you gave me a chance, it wasn't just the money or the job that made the difference. It was the belief you showed in me, the opportunity to be part of something bigger than myself. That's what I think our company can offer that others can't. We're not just a faceless corporation, we're a community of people who have the power to make a real difference." A murmur of approval rippled through the room. Eddie leaned back in his chair, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Well, I think I speak for everyone when I say we're impressed. We'll need to discuss the details further, of course, but I believe we have the beginnings of something truly special here." As the meeting adjourned, board members came up to shake Quincy's hand, offering congratulations and suggestions. Dr. Chen, who had been invited to attend as an advisor, beamed with pride. But it was Eddie's reaction that meant the most to Quincy. As the room cleared, Eddie approached him, eyes shining with emotion. "Quincy," he said softly, "when I dropped those $100 bills all those months ago, I never could have imagined it would lead to this. You've taken a simple act of kindness and turned it into something that could change countless lives. I couldn't be more proud." Quincy felt a lump form in his throat. "I couldn't have done it without you, Eddie. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Eddie shook his head, smiling. "No, Quincy, you did this. You took that chance and turned it into something remarkable. And now," he said, gesturing to the boardroom where decisions that would shape the company's future were made, "you're giving us a chance to be part of something truly meaningful." As they left the boardroom together, Quincy felt a sense of purpose and hope unlike anything he had experienced before. He knew there would be challenges ahead. Implementing such an ambitious program wouldn't be easy. But he also knew that, with allies like Eddie and Dr. Chen by his side, and with the resources of the company behind him, they had a real chance to make a lasting difference. What had started as a simple experiment with $100 bills had grown into something far greater. A catalyst for change that had the potential to transform not just individual lives, but the very fabric of their community. As Quincy stepped out into the bright autumn sunshine, he felt as though he was standing on the threshold of a new chapter, not just in his own life, but in the lives of countless others who would be touched by this initiative. The turning point had arrived, and with it, a world of possibilities. In the months that followed the board meeting, Quincy found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The board had not only approved his proposal, but had thrown their full support behind it, allocating significant resources to get the program off the ground. They named it Bridge to Hope, reflecting its goal of helping people transition from homelessness to self-sufficiency. Quincy's days became a blur of meetings, planning sessions, and hands-on work in the community. He assembled a small team, carefully selecting individuals who shared his passion and vision. Dr. Chen came on board. As a consultant, her expertise proving invaluable as they navigated the complex landscape of social services. One of the first challenges they faced was finding the right way to approach potential participants. Quincy knew from experience that trust was a precious commodity on the streets, and that any program, no matter how well-intentioned, would be met with skepticism. "We need to meet them where they are," Quincy explained to his team during a strategy session, "both physically and emotionally. We can't expect people to come to us, we need to go to them." This philosophy led to the creation of mobile outreach units, vans equipped with basic supplies and staffed by trained counselors. These units would travel to areas where homeless individuals were known to gather, offering immediate assistance and information about the Bridge to Hope program. Quincy insisted on being part of these outreach efforts himself. Despite his new position and growing responsibilities, he felt it was crucial to maintain a direct connection with the people they were trying to help. It was during one of these outreach sessions that Quincy met Maria, a woman in her 50s who had been living on the streets for over a year. As Quincy approached her with an offer of a warm meal and information about the program, he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "I remember you," Maria said, her voice rough from disuse. "You used to be out here too, didn't you? I saw you giving out supplies once." Quincy nodded, feeling a mix of sadness and hope. "That's right, Maria. I was. But I got a chance to turn my life around, and now I want to help others do the same." As they talked, Quincy learned that Maria had lost her job as a healthcare aide after an injury, and without health insurance, had quickly spiraled into homelessness. She was skeptical of Quincy's offer at first, having been let down by promises of help before. But something about Quincy's sincerity and the fact that he truly understood her situation made her willing to listen. By the end of their conversation, Maria had agreed to visit the Bridge to Hope Center for an initial assessment. As Quincy watched her walk away with a flyer clutched in her hand, he felt a surge of hope. This was why he had created this program, to offer people like Maria a real chance at a fresh start. Back at the center, Quincy threw himself into refining the program's various components. There was the immediate assistance aspect, providing food, clothing, and temporary shelter. But more importantly, there were the long-term elements: job, training programs, counseling services, and assistance with finding permanent housing. Eddie remained a constant source of support and guidance. He used his business connections to secure job placements for program participants, and his financial acumen to ensure the program was sustainable in the long term. "You know, Quincy," Eddie said one evening as they were reviewing the program's progress, "when I started that experiment with the $100 bills, I thought I was the one testing humanity. But really, humanity was testing me. And through you, it showed me what true compassion and resilience look like." Quincy smiled, touched by Eddie's words. "We're all being tested, Eddie, every day. It's how we respond to those tests that defines us." As the weeks passed, Bridge to Hope began to see its first successes. Maria, the woman Quincy had met during outreach, had completed a retraining program and was now working as a receptionist at a local clinic. Others were following similar paths, each story of success fueling Quincy's determination to reach even more people. But with success came new challenges. The demand for their services was growing faster than they had anticipated, stretching their resources thin. Some local businesses were hesitant to hire program participants, fearing the stigma associated with homelessness. Quincy knew they needed to do more than just help individuals. They needed to change perceptions in the wider community. This realization led to the next phase of Bridge to Hope's evolution, a phase that would push Quincy and his team to their limits, but also open up new possibilities they had never imagined. As Quincy stood at the window of his office, looking out at the city he once roamed as a homeless man, he felt a mix of pride in how far they'd come and determination to push even further. The Bridge to Hope was built. Now it was time to make it stronger, wider, and accessible to all who needed it. As Bridge to Hope gained momentum, Quincy and his team faced the challenge of scaling their efforts. The success stories were inspiring, but they also highlighted the vast need that still existed in the community. Quincy knew they needed to think bigger. One evening, as Quincy was leaving the office late, he ran into Eddie in the parking lot. The two men, now close friends and partners in this venture, decided to grab a coffee and discuss the program's future. "We're doing good work, Quincy," Eddie said, stirring his latte thoughtfully, "but I can't help feeling we could be doing more." Quincy nodded, his own mind full of ideas and concerns. "I've been thinking the same thing. We're helping individuals, which is crucial, but to really make a dent in homelessness, we need to address some of the systemic issues." This conversation sparked a new phase for Bridge to Hope. Over the next few months, Quincy and Eddie worked to expand the program's scope. They partnered with local businesses to create job training programs tailored to the needs of the community. They collaborated with affordable housing initiatives to help secure stable living situations for program participants. But perhaps their most ambitious project was an awareness campaign aimed at changing public perceptions of homelessness. Quincy became the face of this campaign, sharing his own story and those of others who had found new hope through the program. As Bridge to Hope grew, so did the challenges. The increased visibility brought both support and criticism. Some praised the program for its innovative approach, while others questioned whether a corporate-backed initiative could truly address the complex issues surrounding homelessness. Quincy found himself thrust into the public eye, giving interviews and speaking at community events. It was a role he had never imagined for himself, and at times the pressure felt overwhelming. One particularly difficult day, after a contentious town hall meeting where he had faced harsh criticism, Quincy retreated to the small park where he and Eddie had often talked. As he sat on the familiar bench, he felt a wave of doubt wash over him. "Tough day?" Eddie's voice startled him out of his thoughts. The older man sat down beside him, his face etched with concern. Quincy sighed heavily. "I'm starting to wonder if we're really making a difference, Eddie. For every person we help, there seem to be 10 more in need. And some of the things people said today, it made me question everything we're doing." Eddie was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the setting sun. "You know, Quincy, When I first started my company, there were plenty of people who said it would never work, that I was naive, that I didn't understand the market. But I believed in what I was doing, and I kept pushing forward. He turned to look at Quincy, his eyes bright with conviction. That's what you're doing now. Yes, we face challenges. Yes, there will always be critics. But look at the lives we've changed. Look at your own life. That's real, Quincy. That's what matters. Quincy felt a renewed sense of purpose flood through him. Eddie was right. The road ahead might be difficult, but the impact they were making was undeniable. As Bridge to Hope entered its second year, its effects began to ripple out beyond the immediate participants. Local businesses that had taken a chance on hiring program graduates reported increased productivity and employee loyalty. The affordable housing initiatives they had partnered with were seeing lower turnover rates and more stable communities. Quincy's awareness campaign was also bearing fruit. Public perception was slowly shifting, with more people beginning to understand homelessness as a complex social issue rather than a personal failing. One day, Quincy received a call from Maria, one of the program's first participants. She had not only maintained her job at the clinic, but had been promoted to office manager. Now, she wanted to give back. "I want to volunteer with Bridge to Hope," Maria told him, her voice full of enthusiasm. "I want to help others the way you helped me." This conversation sparked a new initiative within the program, a mentorship scheme where graduates could support new participants. It added a powerful dimension to Bridge to Hope, creating a community of mutual support and understanding. As Bridge to Hope approached its third anniversary, Quincy found himself standing on a stage at a national conference on urban poverty. Looking out at the sea of faces, policymakers, social workers, business leaders, he felt a mix of nervousness and pride. 3 years ago I was homeless," he began, his voice steady. "Today I stand before you not just as someone who found a way out, but as someone who is working to build that way for others." He went on to share the story of Bridge to Hope, its successes, its challenges, and its vision for the future. As he spoke, he could see the impact his words were having. People were leaning forward in their seats, nodding, taking notes. After his speech, Quincy was approached by representatives from cities across the country, all eager to learn more about the program and how they might implement similar initiatives in their own communities. It was a watershed moment for Bridge to Hope. What had started as a local program was now poised to become a national model for addressing homelessness. 5 years after that fateful day when Eddie dropped the $100 bills, Bridge to Hope had grown beyond anything Quincy or Eddie had initially imagined. The program had been replicated in cities across the country, touching thousands of lives. But for Quincy, the most meaningful moments were still the personal ones. Like the day he attended the grand opening of New Hope Cafe, a small coffee shop owned and operated by a group of Bridge to Hope graduates. As he sipped his coffee, surrounded by the warm buzz of conversation and the aroma of freshly baked pastries, Quincy felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to see an elderly man, his eyes bright with recognition. "You're Quincy, aren't you, from Bridge to Hope?" the man asked. Quincy nodded, smiling. "That's right. And you are?" "I'm Joe," the man said, extending his hand. "I just wanted to thank you. Your program, it saved my life, gave me back my dignity, and now, well, I'm one of the investors in this little cafe." Quincy felt a lump form in his throat. "Joe, thank you for sharing that with me. It means more than you know." As Joe walked away, Quincy noticed a young woman watching their interaction. She approached him hesitantly. "Excuse me," she said. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm currently in the Bridge to Hope program. Seeing this place, hearing that man's story as it gives me hope. Real hope." Quincy smiled warmly. "Hope is a powerful thing. Hold on to it. And remember, every person in here was once where you are now. This could be you one day." On the 10th anniversary of Bridge to Hope, Quincy and Eddie stood together on the rooftop of the company's headquarters, looking out over the city they had helped transform. "You know, Eddie," Quincy said, "I've been thinking a lot about that day you dropped those $100 bills, about how different my life would be if I'd just kept that money for myself." Eddie chuckled. "And I've been thinking about how different my life would be if I'd never dropped them in the first place." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. "We've done good, haven't we?" Eddie said softly. Quincy nodded. "We have. But it's not just us, Eddie. It's every person who's come through the program. Every business that's given someone a second chance. Every volunteer who's given their time. It's an endless chain of kindness and hope." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink, Quincy felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. He thought of all the lives touched by Bridge to Hope, the thousands who had found new beginnings, the communities that had been strengthened, the perceptions that had been changed. But more than that, he thought of the ripple effects that would continue long into the future. The children who would grow up in stable homes because their parents had found hope. The businesses that would thrive because they had embraced compassion alongside profit. The society that was slowly but surely becoming more understanding and supportive of its most vulnerable members. "You know, Eddie," Quincy said, turning to his friend with a smile, "I used to think that hope was something you either had or you didn't, but now I know better. Hope is something we create together, every day, through our actions and our choices." Eddie nodded, his eyes bright with emotion. "And that, my friend, is the greatest legacy we could ever leave." As they stood there watching the city come alive with twinkling lights, Quincy and Eddie knew that their work was far from over. There would always be challenges to face, new problems to solve. But they also knew that they had set in motion something powerful and enduring, a chain of kindness that would continue to grow and spread, touching lives in ways they could never fully imagine. In that moment on that rooftop, they felt the full weight and wonder of what they had accomplished. And they looked to the future with hope, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that together there was no limit to the good they could do. You might also like one of the 2 videos on the screen. Feel free to watch them now or subscribe to the channel to watch them later. Thanks for watching.